Righto, money miners, mate. You want to know what a frickin' study is? DFS, PFS, scoping. We are bringing you a study spectacular, made interesting. And a message to all the mining companies out there: when you do a study, give yourself the best chance of executing it with MMS doing the open pit mining. Mineral mining services via either a bloody contract or a funky JV arrangement. They are the team to execute.
Go-to mining contractors,
If you've got a deposit and, you've got a certain amount of work that needs to be done for this thing to, actually produce your cash flow, tell them where you're at and they'll help you complete the rest of the work, and then they'll do the bloody resource, and then they'll mine the bloody thing.
They
and then
effectively do the study.
It's like, it's literally.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, don't look like a dickhead and not execute your study. Get MMS to make you not look like a dickhead.
The phone number is in the show notes. All you need to know.
Here we go.
Love it.
Righto, money miners. You got questions about bloody studies? We are delivering an absolute spectacular. You might notice if you see a good ASX announcement with the word Entech mining consultant in it, we are delivering the people that drive those announcements. The founder himself, Shane McLeay, and the resident principal, I won't say rock licker, we'll say geologist, we'll keep it tidy. Jill Irvin. Thank you very much for walking 100 metres to come and see us for a bit of a consultant spectacular. Macca, whoever said consultants were boring? You've always said that. Yeah. We're making this exciting today.
It should be boring.
Matty, we've tried to make this conversation happen, I reckon, for the best part of a year now. I think we were bumped back a couple of times.
Big ticket people, mate. Big ticket people. They take a bit of work sometimes, but it's going to be worth it.
Shane just saw how big the flow-on effect for Nathan Stoitis was, and was like, I want some of that money in mine effect.
Well, you don't need to get on the board. You're already on the Liontown board. Stoitis is on Rock's Gold. Look at him, just catapulted. He's actually can't believe I'm so interested in metallurgy. He's so flattered.
No, that's good. No, thanks for having us, guys. Here with Jill from Entech, and we've been working together for nearly a decade, and lovely to be here to tell our story.
Well, I guess what initially sparked the discussion was like talking about studies, and I think I was actually talking to you about between scoping, PFS, DFS, bankable, like what's the actual differences in them from like looking behind the hood from the consultant side of actually what goes into the planning of it. What is different between the different levels of how you actually get all this together, and like what is a good study, a bad study, and from you're obviously got the mining engineering expertise, Macca, but you're probably good expert at everything now after having to do it all, and then from the mineral resource side of things, why don't we tie it all in together?
That's the way of saying we realised how much we didn't know, and we need you guys to come on and explain what we don't know. So why don't we start with a good study and a bad study? Let's start the scoping study level, and then maybe we can sort of work through PFS, DFS, these sorts of things.
Well, I'll explain the difference between the levels of study. So really, once you go from scoping to pre-feasibility to feasibility study, BFS and DFS, they don't really mean anything other than it's a feasibility study. So they're kind of at the same level. I think Jorg's trying to get rid of those terms, bankable and definitive. So it's just feasibility study. But really it's the quality of the inputs to the study. So you start with the scoping study, which is very high level, not very high level, but a high level study that really wants to answer the question, is the project feasible? And there will need to be lots of assumptions, and from there, you go to a pre-feasibility study, and that's where you look at the options analysis, and then through to the feasibility study, and that's the one you take through to financial decision. So the quality of the inputs are different as you go along, and obviously the levels of accuracy reduce as you get towards the financial decision making in the feasibility study.
And the number we see kicked around 35%-ish for the scoping study. Is that sort of right?
Yeah, 30 to 50 in that range, depending on who you ask.
The PFS always comes out and the Capex is about twice as big, and then the DFS is twice as big again.
It's a
big 35%.
lot of optimism in those scoping studies.
So when you talk, like, let's use you could probably use, speaking of story, you could probably use Rocks Golden as an example. The you and me, when you're talking about, you've got potentially using a lot of different scenarios when you're talking like, okay, are we going to mine it and create a concentrate to then sell, or are we going to put a processing plant in with high pressure grinding and not go the concentrate route? When you're evaluating those sort of many broad range of options of how to like process something, is that done in a scoping study level and then to evaluate all the different options, and then they're really refined in the PFS when you nail down one idea? When do those decisions get
Most
made?
of the work's done in the PFS.
Okay.
So you may look at a couple of options and there'll be some broad assumptions, but the PFS is when a lot of work is done. And quite often the PFS will take longer than a feasibility study because you've got to look at all the options, and that's where you have to do it at a certain level of accuracy.
Yeah. So okay. So what's the difference between, you probably said it before, if you that situation, scoping to PFS, and is there stages when you just do a PFS straight up and not do a scoping study?
Well, that's one of my biggest bugbears actually, and the question, what is a bad study? And really, you've got to follow that. There's 3 levels of study for a reason, and I think that process is really, really important. And quite often we'll have clients come to us and say, we want to do a scoping and then we're just going to do the feasibility study. And yeah, it might work, but quite often you'll leave stuff on the table, and you might actually get to the end of your feasibility study and go, oh my God, this doesn't work. So yeah, those 3 steps are really important.
And so when you say we just want to go straight to a feasibility study, we just want to go scoping to DFS, is that right?
Yeah. Yep. And people will quite often do that. And simple projects, you'll get away with it where there's not a lot of options, small gold pit in the gold fields, digging up some oxide material, really it's just about tidying it all up. But, something like Rocks Gold, not that I know much about it, but you'll need to obviously put the work in.
There's also like a level of information gathering as well through each step as well. So, from a drilling point of view, the amount of information you have at a scoping study is not what you'd be expecting a DFS. So there's like several rounds of drilling and extra information need to happen through the process as well. So even if someone wants to make it quicker, there's, probably a good few resource infills they got to do.
Yeah, so and probably talking about the drilling specifically in the mineral resource estimate, before you do your first study, your scoping, what's probably the least amount of confidence that you need in the mineral resource when you can commence that? Because what you, I guess, alluded to there is like that the resource needs to be upgraded as the study phases progress.
Yeah, usually it kind of goes like that. But you need some drilling in it. You wouldn't be able to do it on an exploration target necessarily. It'd be, inferred level. So you could sort of conceptually get an idea of what's happening, but you need to move to indicated quite quickly through anything moving from PFS onwards.
Yeah, because we saw one recently where they put out a study with no NPV and no IRR because of the high percentage of inferred material in it. And it's sort of like everyone's like, well, why the hell are you putting this study out? And we don't even have a number to see if it makes money or not. But they obviously wanted to get the study out for, whether it was capital reasons or share price reasons or whatever. But is that a bit of a grey area to actually progress to a study? But it's like, well, you haven't got enough geological information to actually put the 2 numbers behind it that people want to see. I guess, what's your view on it?
The short answer is yes, it still is. Despite everything you have to guide you, it still is up for debate in terms of what people would like to do or what they do.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you're going to need, for what we would do, we would need a certain amount of drilling to be able to wrap a JORC resource around it.
And I assume that number of that inferred percentage number is very dependent on the ore body style. If you can you could have a high inferred number, but if it's something like a continuous, what you deem a continuous ore body, you could be more confident. But if there's shit going everywhere, you need a higher confidence.
Yeah, it's all about confidence, geological confidence. Before and the guys, once it goes through to engineering, there's heaps of other studies as well. But there is deposits that sort of lend themselves to having a more, better continuity, and others that are less. There's commodities. Some commodities are just generally a little bit more simpler from a geological point of view, and deposits can be. So And that's kind of, I guess, where some of the grey area comes in.
What are some examples of that? Of something? What's a simple one you can be pretty confident on inferred, and the other end of the spectrum, it's like we need to drill the living shit out of this to really get an understanding.
Oh, look, I'll just go by commodities. So gold will always need more drilling generally than, say, sort of base metals. But it is hard to just put them into a couple of different boxes. Yeah. So, yeah, look, you can get really complicated VMSs and simpler gold. But generally speaking, gold having nugget does need a little bit more drilling than some other commodities.
And what about like a porphyry system for gold, like a bulky one? Would that need less confidence, or there is a nuggety factor within the porphyry that can really influence it?
Yeah, so if you're giving bulk, obviously the grade is usually a bit lower. So, in terms of having to get in there and mine it and find it in the right spot, there's less risk around selectivity and things like that. So, yeah, look, generally speaking, the simpler it is, you could get away with a bit less drilling, but that's not a rule that's going to hold true everywhere. I'm giving you nice vague answers.
Yeah, no, but it's like that's
it's
why
a geology way.
That's why because I try to simplify things, but if it was that simple, you wouldn't need to exist. So you got to make sure you make it sound as complicated as possible, so everyone comes to you for the studies.
Jill, you mentioned exploration targets. What do you think of them?
Oh, in general?
In general, yeah.
I think there's a place for them. I think perhaps the use of them is still, people aren't always 100% sure when they should or they shouldn't. But I think there is a place, particularly if you're in the junior end, where you have enough information to be able to give some sort of conceptual idea of what's out there. But I think it's a big sort of elastic band in terms of what everybody does.
When did they come in? When did exploration targets become a thing?
That's just a good point. Like, it's probably something, prior to 2018-19, I wouldn't have done one. So I'm not actually sure if there's actually a moment, whether it was maybe it was in 2012.
It's kind of like someone does one and then you realise, hey, it's all good to do it.
If they could do it, why don't we do it?
Yeah.
Well, that is the thing, right, with the ASX. There is a lot of like precedent stuff. So obviously, JORC will tell you something, and I'll have conversations with some people where they'll say, can we do this? And I'll say, here's JORC, this is what you should do. And then they'll pull out like 3 precedents that have already gone out public that don't really talk to that. And that's not necessarily means you should set the bar like that, but it does make it hard to, sort of support and push forward what you need to happen when you're putting out a JORC. When something's already gone out, they've sort of pulled the rubber band hugely, more than you would, As
the study gurus, do you deal with the ASX at all, or that's all on the companies that engage you?
The companies, as I understand it, have like a representative. So, Shane, jump in if you want as well, but they usually have an ASX representative. So if we've got any questions or there's clarifications required, they'll go back to their representative. That's my understanding. It's hard for us to get direct access. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This whole kind of process from, the resource infill all the way through like all the study process, it's de-risking, right? That's what's happening in this process. You're building your confidence in the ore body and its capability of being an economic thing to mine, and the highest degree of confidence of that is that at the production of when the DFS is finalised and FID is announced, right? But are there kind of like, with your amalgamated history of seeing it go wrong, are there sometimes a bunch of clues along the way of when like crappy work might have been done that didn't actually have the highest degrees of confidence?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think where you've seen projects go wrong, it's easy in hindsight, but quite often there'll be one thing that goes wrong. It might be the resource. And unfortunately, if the resource does underperform, everything from that point on, the mining, the economics, the productivities, everything, the cut-off grade, all based on that resource. And if that resource is a bit out, 10, 20, 30% out, that could blow the project up very quickly. So for me, the resource is pretty much, that's what you're starting with. That's the ingredients of your project. So that needs to be right. And skimping on a resource or not doing, peer review and that sort of thing is fraught with danger. So, yeah, and then obviously as you go along, all those inputs become important at the right time. And then, we've seen projects that have, the resource, wrong mining method, issues with paste, issues with community, that can really blow a project up. So there's so many inputs and all of them require that level of diligence to get, your final product. And you can't have one thing fail, or obviously, because that can just blow a project up. So yeah, it's important to get everything right.
And what about the arsenal that you're given when do they ever put constraints? Like, I suppose when you're talking about infrastructure and the design and everything, because you could zhuzh up a mine and make it as easiest as possible with the best infrastructure in place to make it very efficient. But when you're as the entity that's doing the study and given the options, you've got constraints on the amount of capital that you can spend, which affects the optimal mine design and everything. Is the onus on you then is there a lot more pressure to deliver an optimum result, really?
Well, any engineer worth their weight will understand what an engineer's job is, and it's to get the most out of the least resources. So you need to go in with a mindset of fit for purpose. And yeah, you do need to look at, you got to look at a project that lasts 5 years a bit differently than one that's going to last 25 years, when it comes to the quality of the buildings, and, do you need to future-proof the ventilation fan system, or will that be just fine? And later on down the track, if the mine gets bigger, we'll put a better one on. So I think, growing up in Western Australia and like most of our people here, they're pretty tough mines to make dollars out of. So we've kind of got a DNA, especially in Australia and WA, of really doing things pretty tight. So there's not too many gold-plated mines that you see over here. You go to different parts of the world, you'll see more gold-plated mines than you see here. So, yeah, I don't think there's a lot of people out there gold-plating mines. I think people do the Holden Commodore rather than the Ferrari type mentality when it comes to building a mine.
Couple of AU Falcons out there.
Well,
nothing wrong with an AU. Still works.
So when we think of the scoping study stage and a company puts up two potential scenarios, there's a few examples. One is Chalice, that's sort of a recent one that comes to mind. Off the top of my head, it was a sort of 15 and a 30 million tonne per annum example. But more generally, are they trying to see what the market kind of thinks of the two scenarios, or why isn't this decision sort of made in the process by the management team and just one of them put forward to the market?
Yeah, well, we didn't get that job, so I can't talk for experience.
What would you put up?
No, look, it's that is a really complicated project compared to most mines.
Yeah.
Metallurgically, there's lots of things going on, and therefore there's lots of options. So, and poor buggers, the commodity price would halve. I think it was palladium halved during their study time. Like, how do you run a study properly when you've got things moving? You've got so many dials and knobs. It's pretty tough. So I do sympathise with where their journey. And, but I think, to go back to your original question, the study phase being scoping, you would be looking at all different things at that point in time. But unfortunately, when the more work you do, sometimes the more options you find, and you can study these things for the next decade. But it's amazing ore body. I think there will be a project there one day, and they're working through it now. So, it's just a complicated mine, compared to most.
I've got another one just quickly. The appropriate amount to sort of spend on these different phases of projects. I've had this number in my head for ages, that the right amount to spend on a DFS is, might be quoting it wrong here, is 3% of the MPV, just a random rule of thumb. Does that stack up at all, or is that completely wrong? Have you heard that one?
Well, I think people need to spend more on their stuff. It goes without
I gave you
saying.
the layup.
Go get a hold of
That
next
is an
year.
easy one.
Make a shitload out of them.
Yeah. No, look, I don't know what that number is. We are only a part of the study. There's obviously a part of a study that'll include things like geotechnical drilling, include paste fill test work, lots and lots of different things that we don't directly do. So, I'm not sure what that number is, but I do know that there are lots of cost and time pressures during study phases that we're always faced with. And I think that is something that people need to be more realistic about when it comes to study phases and spend money at that point in time, because, like I said before, you can make some assumptions early on that can cost you a lot down the at the end of the day. You might find you've made some capital decisions that are not quite right because didn't look hard enough into it at the early stages. So, I can't stress how important it is to do the study system properly, go through your scoping and spend a lot of time on your pre-feasibility and then finalise it with your feasibility study.
I don't just cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, should we be sceptical of like the teams that decide to manage their own kind of study work streams where they don't necessarily rely on? I've got this kind of hypothesis that a lot of times mines get built, they're kind of marginal, and the numbers that sort of come to the market, especially if they manage their own studies, they might be kind of squeezing things a little bit or taking a very optimistic view on some of the capital or operating cost components. And that's just to sort of paint a rosy enough picture for the thing to actually get financed in the first place, and then things go kind of tits up.
Yeah, I think you need to be sceptical, but there are some owner teams that are doing really good work.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of they need to prove that it's a reasonable study, and sometimes that's some peer review, or they'll farm out parts of that study. But look, it's in their best interest to get the project going generally, but it's not in their best interest to fail either. So I think most teams that take it on themselves will get the right people to do it. So
they also have, there is that ownership thing as well. So I don't think you could sort of put it into the bucket where it's just like they've done it themselves, so they have ulterior motives. If it does go well, they have to deliver on it.
Yeah, if we go back, probably our first big job, if I go way back, when I worked with Sandfire Resources on DeGrussa, and they did the study themselves. Martin Reed did that, and he's had done more studies than we've had hot dinners, and he got us in to do the mining component of it. So we sat in there like an employee and did the mining component, but the study come out as a Sandfire study, and it was a good study, and it worked well and executed well. So that's done, not often, but it is done.
You probably just got to spend more time looking at, the inputs around what's gone into it as opposed to necessarily who's done it.
That great help there for sure. Shout out Tristan Summerford. How competitive is the consulting tendering process? So say there's a big hotshot study that's coming up. Entech want to get their hands on it, and I assume everyone else does. Is it a very competitive landscape? Is it like Burncut and Barminco fighting over a contract?
Yeah, a little bit, and it's probably a good comparison when you look at the underground contracting space, because that's where I come from as well. Elton, rest in peace. So the answer is yes, it is competitive, but it also does rely on relationships. And, there'll be people that will come to us just because they've worked with us before, and there'll be no competition. We just get the work. And some of our people that are in our space, that'll be the same for them as well. We won't even get a shoe in. We won't even be able to put a tender in. So I would say probably only less than half of the work we get we'd have to compete for, and the rest would just be return work.
So if we go back to DeGrussa, your first one of your first, what was that? Probably 14 years ago.
Yeah, it was 2010.
And
2011.
So how does how does studies evolved, and probably yours particularly from that one to what you do now? Like, I assume there's just a bucket load of learnings from studies, and then give yourself do you think you have a better statistical chance now of executing a better study based on what you learn, or is it just a continually evolving environment now that bloody lithium comes in and just confuses the hell out of everyone? But does the skills and expertise evolve over time and the efficiency of it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the software's come a long way in that time, and I think for us, people that step out of operations and go into study work, they've got to understand that the work is different, and you don't have to worry about levels being 1 in 50 and making sure that the sump's 1 in 6 and all of this. You just do a design that's got the right amount of meters in it. So your levels will be flat. If you try and do the work at the same level of diligence, you think someone's going to execute it, then it'll take you too long. So you need to do it a lot faster. And obviously the tools have changed a lot in the world. Back in the day, it was more, Serpac and more data mine. And as we know now, Deswick have really got a lot of the market. So we tend to use that a lot more now because a lot of our clients use that. So, so I think software's changed a bit as well, made things a bit quicker.
What's the reality of working on a study? Are you working with the client every day? Are you touching base every couple of days, or what does it actually
It's
look like?
probably normal would be at least once a week.
Yeah.
But we've worked in people's offices as well. Like even in recent times, someone will spend a few days a week in someone's office, or we've had the client working in our office as well. And that's good.
What's the sort of standard period for a scoping study? How long is that contract? How long will you be working on it?
How long's a bit of string? It's a good question. I know what I say will be half the amount of time that our GM Dan Donald will say, so I'll get in trouble for this. But you're probably talking 2 or 3 months for a scoping study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jill, you mentioned earlier as well, looking at the studies and maybe honing in on a couple numbers if it's been an in-house one. But looking more broadly, in-house or done by another mob, what are the sort of inputs you guys, maybe on a geo side and on a sort of mining engineering side, what are the key inputs you'll look at first if it's a non-Entech study?
Yeah, so I'll go first.
Yeah.
So for if it's a non-Entech study, you said?
Yeah.
All right, so if we were to pick it up and just be looking through it?
Yeah, and see sort of where they messed up.
Red flag.
Well, everyone thinks they can look through something and see where someone's, like Shane said before, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But a couple of things that, I would look at straight up is just what they use for a reporting cut-off grade and what their grade is. So the reason being this sort of talks to the grade tonnage curve. How many of the tonnes sit right between where they've actually reported it and what they've got to mine at. And because the more the tonnage that's in there, the harder they have to work to get the, select what's ore and waste, right? So that's one of the kind of key things. Get the GT curve out and have a look. Not everyone just puts that in. But in terms of if I'm actually having a look from a diligence point of view, looking through the study, there's also who's contributed to it.
Yeah.
I think you said that before the authors.
Yeah, the first thing I'd look at is
who's done it.
Yeah.
Like the individuals. I think experience is worth a lot when it comes to study work. Have they done similar type projects before? How did those projects go? But on the mining side, the first thing we'll have a look at is the mining method selection. Have a look at the core, make sure it makes sense compared to the mining method selection. So just that, I'm talking about an hour's work, just the first thing I'd look at. And then cost and productivity. How productive do they think the fleet's going to be? Are they being realistic? Where is the project? You just have a quick look over at a few key things and then do a bit more work from there.
How do you know what an unrealistic expectations of productivity look like?
Oh, we've got a pretty good database, Damien. And that's his job, right? So cost and productivity.
So, if it's underground, it's like how many meters development.
Yeah, that's
month.
Right.
Yeah.
So, he's a wealth of knowledge. So we will sit down and have a look at it, have a look at all the key assumptions, and to make sure they look realistic. We've got that in house, and we've got we know what a jumbo's going to get. That's the start of the productivity, right? So you got to get the meters. So the jumbo's the first thing you look at, the most important thing for the start of a mine. Do they think they're going to get 200 meters a month in the decline, or 150 or 120? And that'll change depending on which state you're in or which country you're in as well. So there are a couple of quick and dirties we'll have a bit of a look at just to see what they think they're going to get. Because when it comes to NPV, if you're a little bit out and you're going to start production 6 months later, that's going to make a big difference to a project. So
I think the around resources, there's always, in terms of feasibilities and the resources side of things, a lot of the risks haven't changed a lot. Talking back to that question you had before about, has it got better or have we got better? There's still a lot of risks that are similar, geological complexity, people classifying, potentially where it's not supported by drill spacing. Those sort of things are kind of recurrent themes that keep coming back. So, in terms of feasibilities and do you get better with experience when you're looking at things? You will probably look for flags quicker, but a lot of the risks around feasibilities do come back to similar things. Like one of the key things is, there's one resource that underpins a hell of a lot of other work and value. And that resource is one person's view on something. And if it's a simple ore body, then the risk of them being too far out is not too bad. But there's no such thing as really a straightforward ore body. So I think, one of the things for feasibilities is good and we've had a few clients do this, they'll get more than one resource done. They don't really pick the best one, but they might run it internally and have us do an external, and they'll sort of have a look at what the difference is. And if there is a lot of difference, we'll try and understand what that is. So there's one group did 3. And then that also gives feedback to management and board in terms of, look, we're getting these big variations before it goes into the study, and the guys do all their work on everything.
So 3 different geo teams using the same data. What resource do you spit out? Is that the analysis each would do?
So they would sort of act independently.
Yeah.
And just come up. And so the idea being you get an idea of exactly the variation in your ore body. Now, it's not information that everybody wants to hear, but it's probably good to get an idea of what that would be at the start.
And if there's a lot of variation, it might be an indication you should do some more dense drill spacing
Yes,
in the first place.
It usually comes down to just infilling more information, right?
So how many, is there many cases where a company comes to you and said, right, this is our resource, or even if you've got to do the resource and they want to do a study and they think it's enough confidence, but you're like, and as you said, the whole study is essentially underpinned by that resource. Jill walks into the room and says...
And she looks like that. To me.
Lean forward with the head down, when Jill's serious. Like, we cannot do this study unless there is a better drill density, full stop.
Well, it's an easy way to make money, just do more drilling. But, yeah, look, I think those that are happy to really understand where they're going with their project, they'll ask those questions.
Yep.
And they'll seek outside information, like help or... not say help, but, assistance or an opinion, and they're open to being able to talk about different inputs and opinions as opposed to, this is how I want it to be and this is the path we're going on, and any news that sort of disagrees with that gets discarded along the way.
And most companies are like, most companies in this country anyway are usually pretty amicable and work together, and like there's a good relationship, or is there sometimes it's a bit argy-bargy? With like obviously what you think the studier is going to be the best outcome versus the capital they want to outlay for all that work?
Yeah, I think they're just discussions to have. So
There's been a few discussions over the years. Not all clients are, happy with what you say when you tell them it's not as good as what they thought it was going to be. So it's not all plain sailing. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there is, Okay.
Jill's probably thinking, what am I allowed to say here? But if you say it, it's all right.
She's worried I'm going to say it. That's what it is.
I usually say too much.
But sometimes Jill doesn't even get involved, right? Because the client will come to us and say, here's our resource. Can you do a mining study on that? So completely bypassed whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we take that and, we'll obviously make sure the metal adds up in the model and do all our mining type checks of the resource. But whether that resource, if that resource been signed off by some other competent person,
you have to assume it works.
That's right.
Oh, so
she's bypassed.
Okay, and then the onus and the liability is on that competent person.
So somebody else has signed off on it, whether that could be internal or external or whatever.
Yeah. And then I suppose broad liability for a study. If you're putting out a study, who does take the onus? You or the company? Like, is there, in terms of, this isn't an insurance ad, by the way, it probably could be.
It could be.
But how does that work?
Well, the study that we put out is our work, and we're accountable for that work that that we've signed off on. So if it's a reserve, we've signed off a reserve. That competent person is liable for the work that's been included in that. They don't have control over all the inputs because they'll get experts that'll do the resource. I'm talking mining only now.
Yeah.
They'll resource someone who's done the geotech work might be done third party. So and they're the competent person, or the expert, I should say, for that sort of work. There's only so much a mining type person can look into to make sure things add up, but somebody else is accountable for the work that feeds into it because you can't control everything.
Yeah. And what if you want to talk, like speaking geotechnically specifically, like say you put a study out and there's recommended or the proposed ground support patterns and pillar spacings, and say when that mine gets into production and there is an incident, geotechnical incident, and it could be a failure of ground support or something to do with pillars or something, is there any liability on the consultant that put that forward in the study? Or does the company then take on that responsibility?
Well, I think it's almost the study's pretty much completed at that point in time, and then you have a geotechnical team that is accountable from that point on.
Yeah.
So they're doing the design, they're doing the ground support design, they're doing the reviews underground, they're doing the checking.
Yep.
So the study's almost
Old news by then.
almost
Old
gone.
news,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Just
thing, right?
check.
A study's like a moment in time.
Yeah.
And a mine is evolving, and our spreadsheets are so like prescriptive and accurate, but the reality of a mine is so different to a spreadsheet too.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's why people, there was a question people sort of asking, at what point do feasibilities sort of go out of date?
Yeah.
Like with everything that was changing, particularly on costs and pricing, in the last couple of years. I think
Do you have a view on that? Are they out of date, like a month after?
Look, I think obviously anything pre-COVID is out of date,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because costs have increased
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Commodity prices have changed a lot in that time. So
Yeah, I think
they're
there's
out of date.
there's a couple of conversations, nothing actually based on any real information, but just talk on the street, like people sort of, like around that time, 2 years or so, and you could 2 to 3 years, you could be.
But you might not need a clean sheet of paper
No.
study. You just update all the assumptions and give it a
Yeah.
revamp.
On that sort of topic, are there other sort of trends more broadly, say since you started Entech 15 years ago, things you have to do in studies you didn't once have to do, other things that kind of stand out, or is it, just a more simple evolution in the study process?
Yeah, I don't think there's been any significant changes. I don't know, Jill, on your side?
Yeah, no, look, it's pretty boring on that front. There's probably, I think moving forward, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on, ESG than there has been in the past. There's obviously a lot of whole different conversation and podcast on that. So from my point of view, though, there's not a lot of changes. I think some of the conversations around risk are a lot more developed, and in terms of what you can, what we're now putting out in our studies is a lot more defined than perhaps it was, and making sure risk is communicated downstream. It's a big part of the conversation, probably, all the way along.
So that's outlining to the client what you sort of deem to be the top 3 or top 5 big risks.
Yeah, we'll also, make sure it's at the front of everything, not buried at the back. Everyone gets to read it. And then, feasibilities have their own sensitivity inbuilt in it. We have some, in terms of software, from a geology point of view, we have a few different ways we can tackle that now, which is really quick and efficient. And sort of test, like we're talking, before about risk around resources, we can test some of those sensitivities pretty quickly now.
Shane, you mentioned the NPV before as well. The discount rate, is that just shoved down your throat? Do you have any say or any recommendation?
No say. Though we will comment if we think someone's been a bit unrealistic.
What is your rule of thumb thoughts on discount rates?
Well, if it's too far from 8%, you're asking questions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And when did 8 become the number instead of 5?
I think 8 was the number.
Should have been the number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think obviously inflation dropped to, and interest rates dropped there at one stage, so that's why people were pushing 5, but before that it was 8.
And so what cases shouldn't be 8? What's your big factors driving that?
I'm no expert in that field. I just ask questions, why isn't it that?
I'd argue that 8's the wrong number too. 'Cause I think of project finance, you're never getting project finance debt cheaper than 13%, right? So if the debt's 13%, you know, the equities, like the cost of equity is north of that, so your weighted average cost of capital should be somewhere in between, like, you know, those two numbers.
The risk-free rate, like a US government bond, is about 5%.
Yeah.
There'd be no mines with a mine life any longer than 5 years ever go.
And that's
get going.
That's a point too.
Yeah. What now, when you do your first pass look at a mine now, just in terms of, and we could probably just talk
operating mine or study.
Nah, just for a study, something comes to you. What like the grades for a gold mine compared to when you first started 14 years ago? Do the numbers? Have you had to change your rule of thumbs of what is a
100%.
profitable gold mine?
It's probably half.
Yeah.
It's just everything, because it used to be like 4 gram for an underground, 2 gram for an open pit.
Yeah.
Now it's half of that, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be half.
Yeah.
Roughly.
And was that been a gradual thing, or is it just in the last few years that we've seen these?
I think it's
sub 1
sped
gram?
up in the last few years. I remember we did a study not that long ago, and the reserve was sub 2 grams for an underground. And everyone was having a heart attack. And it's like, well, but it works. And, oh, no, we need to get it higher. Well, we can't just get it higher. You know, it is what it is. We'll go to one significant figure, or what do you want us to do? But it worked, right? And so I think people's mindsets have changed. So that was about 5 years ago. That mine's operating.
How many times have you ever come across it? Like you see the ore body, or you look at the ore body and you're like, this mine's not going to work. And then you actually crunch the numbers and it works. Like, what are there any examples where you've been very surprised that, like, going through the whole process of the study?
No.
you always know from the ore body.
Good intuition.
I haven't been surprised yet.
I suppose you wouldn't be good at your job, would you?
That's such an interesting takeaway.
Yeah.
So it's basically you can really tell from the ore body.
Oh, look, there's like Shane was saying before, you know, you could probably handle maybe one thing moving against you, but if you're starting off with, you know, the geology and resource side, there's stuff already moving against you, and then there's some other things. I don't know, I think maybe when you've done a few of them, you can
tell.
Look, geological complexity is huge. That's cost all the way along, particularly if you don't pick it up at the study level and you experience it as you're trying to ramp up. It's, you know, it's the reason why, you know, many struggle to, you know, in the first year or two to actually get to where they need to be.
So I'll weave 2 questions into one question just to make it hard for you, Jill. So what are the cases when you see a ore body that has a high grade on the surface that doesn't work, and then on the opposite to that, an ore body where you see a lower grade but you're like, this can work? What are the factors outside of the grade that make it work and not work?
Well, in terms of, I guess, and I'll let Shane talk to how you're going to mine it, but the higher grade stuff, if we're like talking generally speaking, tend to be perhaps narrower vein stuff. So then it goes down to width. And, you know, you can have really good grade, but the width doesn't really carry a stope. And, you know, that's something that can be a problem. And in terms of lower grade, well, with pricing and everything the way it is now, there's, you know, those sort of things are actually meaning you can take a lot more bodies underground than we could probably have done before. So
and that's a life thing. Like, it's like you can get so much more life out of it because you can go underground at a lower grade now.
It is, you know, I wouldn't want to sort of generalize too much on it, but it does change a few things. Some of the grades we can take out now mean sort of what was sort of previously incremental can be considered in, you know. It's just, it has changed a lot, and it's still changing in terms of what people can operate at.
What about like uniformity and continuity? There's probably 2 mines I can't mention here. But how much is that, especially for lower grade stuff, how much is that sounds like a big driver in making lower grade things work? Just knowing I guess an example we've probably seen unfortunately far was Chalice, and like whether that was either density or like just not continuity of the ore body, and it's just like you might be thinking you're getting something, but you're just not for that period in time. I assume that's a pretty big bloody driver as well. Yeah.
Look, you know, obviously because I'm a geo, I'll bang on about complexity for the geology. But yes, if you're going to go lower grades, the more simpler, if it's a tabular kind of ore body in sandstone, then that's a pretty simple thing to tackle, as opposed to say something heading underground it's hard to find, hard to see. It's going to cost you more to get that out, and so that kind of eats away your margin.
And with open pits, because we tend to focus on underground a bit in this corner over here, but I've broadened my horizons with pits. So when we talk about, you might see these pits with these, as you said, tabular. It looks great on the surface, but how the mineability of those tabular pits, like I assume you can't be scraping in great detail on a pit, like everything will get blown up and spread everywhere. Is there what's involved in actually mining these efficiently and trying to maximise the grade and not diluting it with shit flying everywhere in a pit?
Yeah, well, if it is, I mean, I'm just trying to get your example. If something's quite broad and tabular, then you're not necessarily going to be selective within it. So it comes down to selectivity. If you really want to be going in and grabbing a bucket here and a bucket there, that's not how you want to be mining it. So for pits, ideally those sort of deposits where they're, sort of tabular, go across the pit floor, similar grade, you're not having to pick the eyes out of it, they will always go better. And
is most gold open pits, can you easily distinguish the ore visually, or are there some where it all looks the bloody same?
There's one I saw today, all look the bloody same.
Oh,
but, there is usually some sort of redeeming feature. You're going to look
a green tinge.
Just something.
Which is really good for colourblind mining engineers.
Yeah. No, look, obviously visual ore bodies are good. It just ticks one of those boxes, less you have to worry about, But people just need to be smarter if they can't see it visually. You've got to do more work, assay for more background elements and try and get a bit of a characterisation around what actually drives your ore body. Then you can kind of rely on proxies to sort of find your way around. It usually means you've got to spend more money on information.
As long as it comes into your pockets, it's all good.
But if the price stays where it is, then everyone can drill more.
We spoke about a company a few weeks ago, Xanadu. You don't have to speak specifically to the company, but the thing we'd heard, this was as the PFS study was coming out, is, from an investor, ignore the Capex. That's a Western-style Capex. The project is in Mongolia. If a Chinese company were to buy it, they'll slap on their own Capex and they'll be able to do it way cheaper. What do you kind of think of this? Like, I'm curious to get your thoughts about the ability of sort of companies in different countries to significantly mark down the Capex of a project.
Well, I think it's just got to be realistic. If that is what it is, you would want to demonstrate that in the study. So how do you justify that cost? And you'd want to see that. But there's definitely different costs in different countries for Capex, for operating, equipment selection. Countries do make massive differences in the study. So if we're doing a study of the same ore body in two different countries that are quite different mining-wise, those studies would look different.
But in this case, when the ore body's in one country and you're talking about a potential miner from Australia versus a potential miner from China, is it just that they're buying different, maybe lower quality in some cases, maybe higher quality in other cases, equipment, machinery, these things, and that's what ultimately leads to the massive change? It's
a good question for them without knowing much about the project, but I think it's bold in saying that. We try to put science and facts behind the studies. So, if there's no science and facts behind some of those assumptions, then, you'd definitely be asking questions.
And there's probably a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we don't even know about or appreciate. And one's probably like analysis, owner mining versus contracting. What goes into that?
It's a good question. And, I kind of tongue-in-cheek always say when someone asks us they want to do that is, what do you want the answer to be?
Yeah.
Because it's, again, there's one thing that's very hard to measure, which is a key input to that analysis, and that is, what is the productivity that you're going to get as an owner-operator, and what is the productivity you're going to get with a contractor? Are you going to assume they're the same? If so, how? How are they going to be the same? Because costs are costs. You can go to Sandvik, buy a jumbo, you know how much it costs. Diesel, you know how much it costs. People, you pretty much know how much they're going to cost. So the real differences are contractor margin and productivity. And there's big differences in productivities. I'm not saying contractors are always better and clients are always worse, but they're going to be different, and you need to articulate that in some way.
And so based on your big database that Damo's established, is there a trend of productivity, contractor versus owner-operator?
Well, in this state, we have a lot of contractors, right? So, and what we tend to find is owner-operators are later on in the mine life and contractors are early on in the mine life. So that's probably more so the case here in WA than anywhere else. Hence why our contractors are very good and why they're all over the world now. So we are very good at development. So I don't know if there's a big difference because it's very, the thing about mining, we're not all just mining in concrete. Every mine is different. They're different depths. They're different hardness in rock. So you can have the same people in different areas going to get, drastically different results. So it's not an easy answer for that one.
And what about the balance between development and production when you're owner-operator versus contractor? Like notoriously the contractor, it's like they love doing development because they did historically get paid more for development. It keeps all the high-maintenance jumbo operators happy. But then it's trying to balance that to get the ore out, which is what the client wants, but whether the contractor mightn't make as much money off it if the contract was set up that way. Would you think owner miners are more aligned to get ore out, to get the metal, rather than getting the higher cost development done?
Yeah, I think contractors get paid on tonnes generally, which doesn't necessarily equal good dilution and ore control. So I think that's probably the only one that's very difficult to align. Meters, it's easy to align, everyone wins. But when it comes to stoping, it is a bit difficult to both have the same goal when it comes to that.
How does geotech impact mine design?
It's apart from geology, it's really it's the number two thing, right? Because it's all about how big your voids can be.
Yeah. We never talk about geotech.
Yeah.
So I know
Well, we happen to have the best geotech going around, Tom.
Who told me that? Oh, that Tom told me that.
We're very, very important. And I am the world's worst geologist, have zero interest, but I love going to a core yard because I want to go and see the core to see how structurally good or bad it is.
If it's together or not.
Am I looking at sticks of core or trays of road base? Because that's going to really tell you the difference on how that mine's going to perform and the void size and really, really important.
Gotcha. So bad geotech, the void's got to be smaller?
Yeah, bad ground. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Bad ground. Definitely. The voids, and in some places you can't actually mine it underground, right?
Right.
But yeah, definitely the void, and it changes the ground support and stopes, whether you need paste fill, you can leave pillars. So it's one of the major inputs to mine design selection.
And for open pit, is it just
wall
the
angle,
angle?
Yeah. Wall angle. Yeah. That's the main thing.
So the ore might be nice and solid, but then you look at the other side of the core. Oh shit! There's an ultramafic hanging wall.
Yeah.
So your dilution's going to be shitloads.
Yeah. You have a good look at the hanging wall because that's generally what's what's hanging in your stopes, and then you have a good look in the footwall because that's where your decline's going to go. So go to the core yard, have a look at the ore, then go about. Have a look at the next 4 trays that way and have a look at the next 4 trays that way and then, this will be good.
And
Easy
there's
to
The
mine.
core yard, site visits core yard is like the bit that I want to blow my brains out. every
Oh,
time.
mate, get your mark and call for a day. Well, and there's one example.
I get that.
There's one example which I don't have the full information on, but I know it's like one of the, a real big up and coming open pit, sensational. But they're talking about, the future underground of it. But I'm pretty sure that it has an ultramafic hanging wall. So it might be fine to open pit, but then
Different
to take
considerations for
that
underground.
then underground to control the grade is like that's going to be a big challenge.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about, which one, but but ultramafic there's ultramafic and ultramafic.
Yeah.
Some ultramafic is very good.
Yeah.
And some is, if you look at Campbell type ultramafic, that
Pass.
where I grew up, it can be horrible. So So it might be good ultramafic. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
I'm just hearing that geology is still key.
Yeah.
That's all I heard.
Sorry, I'll pay attention to the courtyard next.
You are just the sponges of the sponge cake. You just
No,
cannot
that's
have
all
it
I'm hearing.
without
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
There's one other component in these studies I always look at, and I'm curious where they pluck the numbers out of, the contingency. So in a DFS or PFS, it can be a relatively decent component, decent amount of money. Who picks that number and how is that number picked?
Generally, client will look at the contingency, and it's generally around the Capex, right? So, so that's where it comes from. Pretty much everywhere else in the study, we just try to make realistic numbers, and kind of sit in the middle of the bell curve when it comes to productivities and so forth. But Capex will often have contingency in there, which is normally led by the client.
Yeah, but that contingency number, is there like a rule of thumb in the Capex for the quantum of it, or
I'm not
is it
sure if
purely-
there's a standard number. Some people use 5, some 10. I think, again, it comes to the confidence in the number.
Yeah.
The less confident you are, obviously you're going to make it a bit higher.
Yeah.
So what about these tenders that we see, contractors tendering for a mine or a new portal or whatever, even if you're pretty sure it's going to one contractor, but then you got all these other ones tendering. What's the role in the numbers that get thrown around? I know that contractors have to deal with consultants to figure out what numbers to put in tenders. Like what's the role you guys play with contractors?
Yeah, Damien runs that part for us. He often runs tenders. So he'll help the client, get the physicals, the scheduler rates together, and then get the formal contract and the contract document, and then go to tender. So we're involved in that process. Probably one of the key conversations we have with the clients is what sort of contract do you want? Because there's everything from fully variable, which is if you do nothing, you get paid zero, and you take a cut, you get paid X amount. So there's no fixed component. So that's kind of one extreme. And then the other extreme is you cost plus, essentially, an alliance type contract. And then in between, which is a bit more normal, is where there's some fixed, like you might pay for the site manager and the admin and maybe some of the equipment and so forth, and then there'll be a variable. So, and that varies generally between about 30 to 70% fixed.
Yeah.
So we have that conversation, and really you try to line up the contractor and the client to have the same goal, and that can vary, and depending on the contract type and where the contract is at, that can change, and the market as well. If the market's really hot, then the risk will move from one side to the other.
And so that's why you need someone like Mr. Damien. I assume that is so variable in terms of, like as you said, timing in the market, the size of the mine life, the ore body. It's just there's a lot of ingredients that go into that cake. A lot of cake references today.
Yeah, no, that's right. And there's probably 10 contractors out there, and some are tier 1, 2, and 3, and depending on the project, you might need a tier 2 because they're right sized for this project. Or, if you've got a line town, for example, or a Bellevue that's going to require multiple jumbos, like 4+, then you'll need, you won't be able to talk to the smaller guys. You'll have to go to the big end of town.
Yeah. So that's dealing with the client that's going out to tender to the contractors. Do you ever deal with the contractors?
Yeah, all the time. So
what do you do for them?
Well, we have actually done work for some of the contractors, like helping them with mine design and so forth. Like in Australia, it's pretty much the client does the mine design and gives it to the contractor, and you give me a price. But if you go overseas, a lot of the time the contractor does the schedule. So we've helped out contractors, do the actual mining schedule and then present that to the client. Yeah. So we've done that sort of work as well.
Oh, there you go.
It's like MMS, mate.
Oh, just bloody fully integrated.
Jill, I've got another one. There's a number that always comes out, and I'm always kind of suspicious about it. I just think it's kind of open to being gamified, and that's metal equivalents when companies report these for drill results or maybe on a resource basis.
Mm-hmm.
What do you kind of think of them more broadly, I guess? And is this something just by default you go and interrogate? Is that just the way to kind of go about it?
Yeah, in terms of how I feel about them, I think they are helpful and there is a place for them. I think there is a lot of, there's payables, there's pricing, there's recovery, there's things that go into getting the equivalent that means that, if you're going to use them, it would generally be on a pretty advanced project or a project which has the company already has an operating mine using that equivalent. So, in terms of using them, I know there is debate around it, but I think if you have a good amount of information behind it, there's no problem using it, as long as you're not like, you've got to use a gold equivalent and a zinc deposit. There is opportunities for people to misuse them.
So exploration companies, they chuck one up, on one of their first sorts of campaigns, take them with a pinch of salt. That's what I'm sort of hearing.
Oh, look, yeah. I'm probably going to be more diplomatic, but I would say that in my experience and how I would use them, I've advised companies that are probably early stage to not go with equivalent at that point and to do it once they have some, some information science and solid numbers behind a couple of those other things. I mean, the tricky thing about equivalence is that it kind of depends how you're going to get it through the plant in terms of what the recovery is going to be, right? So if you're talking about base metals, there's different cons that come out the back end. You might have a metal in there, but you might not be able to get a con out or at the recovery that you think you might be able to get. So like I said, I think if you stick to using them, and this is just my experience, using in more advanced projects, that's where I'm comfortable using them. I often sort of push towards NSRs now, so smelter returns. Yeah,
that's a clean way.
Yeah, because you don't have that conversation around, if you've got 4 or 5 metals, which equivalent, because sometimes they're, especially with the pricing, they're all very similar. Which one do you put it on? So NSRs are a good way.
Totally.
That's kind of my go-to. Again, it's usually they're at feasibility level.
Yeah.
But it can be exciting to put a metal equivalent out if you've got to drill.
I've got 2 questions, and after I ask the first one, you're going to know what the second one is.
All right.
What's the best study you've ever done? What do you put the Entech hat on as the greatest study ever that you were most proud of? There'd have to be one.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's studies we're doing now, but
they could be.
You won't know until they actually get going whether it's the best ever, really. So
right, you discount that.
I think what you really want at the end of the day is you want the study to be executed. Now, I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, we're here to build stuff and to mine metals. So I think some of the proudest ones would be De Grussa. That was one of our early ones. And
started at the top.
We started, look, it was really, really good for our resume for about 5 years or even longer. So that was really good. We also did the study for Nova, another cracking deposit.
High grade.
And, that's in its later years now, but pretty much what we said in the study happened, which was really good. Really wanted a conveyor there, to put a conveyor in an underground crusher, but we couldn't get that one across the line, unfortunately. The previous owners didn't want to spend that little bit extra, but that was quite good. So at the end of the day, I think, look, we like doing the work we do, but we really like it when the mines happen. I think that's what it's all about.
I won't. I was going to ask what's the shittest
what the
study,
next one is,
but I'll rephrase it. What's been one of the? Is there any that stand out that were the most not difficult, but you really had to unpack a lot of new learnings to get the study done? Something very new and.
They're probably ones you haven't heard about, I think.
Or are they sometimes commodity specific?
I think we're doing some work at the moment, and we're doing something that's a bit new, which is doing some discrete event simulation, and that's, we all know that a truck can do 90,000 to 120,000 TKMs a month, get 450 to 500 hours. We kind of know these things. We know a decline can get 2 million tonne a year out. So we use a lot of rules of thumb in mining, and but what that doesn't allow you to do is really push the envelope and get that extra 5 or 10% and say, okay, how many tonnes can we really get out of a decline? Or if we're loading a crusher underground, will 2,900 do? Or if we put 2 in there, do we get double? Or so we're starting to do simulation around those events, you know, on a real time basis, where you can do some calibration, and then you can run that and actually see what you can do. You know, congestion. So it really deals really well with congestion. You put in crib times, you put in normal distributions, you do all this kind of work. So that's exciting. That's something that we're doing a bit new at the moment.
Oh, chat GP Entech.
Pity nobody wants to pay for it. But it's
till now. We'll give a special discount code for that.
Yeah, that's
it. What about and it's I wouldn't say it's gone quiet, but there was the push not long ago with the electrification of Australian mines, which is with 1 in 7 declines is very challenging and so not practical sometimes. But with the new stuff coming out with, I know there's the battery electric trucks, but then the potential hybrid versions for trucks and loaders. What is your first take on all of this, and is it all possible for a 1 in 7 decline in Australia?
Yeah, well, this is the actual reason why we started doing the discrete event simulation, because we wanted to understand how to compare diesel and electric trucks. You know, how do you charge a truck? Do you battery swap? Where does the charger go? And really, we wanted to model that. I think we're definitely heading in that route. I think it's going to take longer than what people think, and every mine will be different. Some mines will have battery electric trucks, not a problem. Others will have hybrids, because you just cannot have a battery big enough. So I think it's going to be horses for courses. I like electric loaders. I think they will be a good thing. My personal opinion is we won't be swapping batteries, we'll be charging batteries. I think that is a cleaner, more... I think the mines are more amenable to integrating that than actually battery swapping. I think it sounds a lot easier than it is.
Charging is in like a hybrid, like charging.
No, I think you'll have a battery loader and you'll pull up and you'll sit there for 20, 25 minutes and charge it up, and then you'll go again.
Yeah.
The problem with battery swapping is each of those batteries is probably worth $1 million each. So if you got $3 million sitting there charging, or $2 million, that's another loader.
Yeah.
So you might as well just have a loader and charge it up. So, and they're probably some of the things we want to model, because you sound like, 22 minutes or 25 minutes to charge up. Yeah, but you can go and have crib, you can service it, you can do other things, but really trying to understand what that means in the day-to-day life of a mine, I don't think we really understand yet. Yeah. But the OEMs have still got some catching up to do. They're not there yet. There's not a whole fleet of them sitting on Great Eastern Highway ready to go to work at the moment. So, it's going to take time, but we will get there.
Do you think there's going to be any change in how the clients and companies outlay the capital for greenfield projects? If there's not there's shitloads of them coming online, in terms of electrifying it with shafts instead of declines?
We're already working on a project. We've been pushing conveyors. Yeah. So we think, because conveyors is, and it will depend on the depth and the tonnage and all of that, and we can model that. So I think that is the easiest way to electrify a mine and haul decent amounts of dirt to 2 to 3 million plus tonnes per annum, because it kind of gets above where trucks really work that well. So shafts, I think we will see shafts, but they are big and expensive. So I think there's going to be, and our ore bodies don't really suit it. I think the super pit will be a classic. I reckon there'll be a few shafts out there. Yeah. They're running, half a dozen jumbos and half a dozen portals, and they're going bananas there.
So there'll be 2 4 million tonne mines coming up. That's unbelievable.
Do you think they'll ever cave it?
Oh, possibly. Yeah, sub-level.
Good way to deal with all the voids.
Might cave themselves.
Yeah. So with the conveyors, is it still, you pretty much it has to be straight, and then something going over the top of it, and it has to be a straight zigzag. It cannot be curved.
No. Just impractical cost-wise, I think there is curved conveyors, but I don't think anyone's doing it underground. Right. I think they're very old, simple technology, very easy way to electrify a mine. I think the other thing that we've looked into, and mines, we're seeing a lot more solar farms and wind farms on mine sites now. So that even will bring us closer to having fully electric mines, because there's no point. A lot of the mines at the moment are burning diesel on the surface. So why electrify your mine only to add another 3 diesel gensets onto the surface? What are you really doing? You're wasting. It's not really much of a benefit. But if we can tap into green power and some of these mines, Liontown just put in a massive hybrid power station there. They have lots of green energy. Same with Bellevue. Jundee are putting in some wind turbines, I think. So, I think the future's electric for those mines.
And with those conveyor setups, is there like you might be able to leave a hook for people to come through your door here, but is there has there been evolved how to actually develop the mine, install conveyor systems, maintain egress without having to chuck in multiple different declines? Like, can you drive utes under a conveyor belt?
Nifty had that. So Nifty had a conveyor belt in the top part of the mine, and you drove under it. That was the main in and out of the mine. The mines department don't really like it because if that catches on fire, which conveyor belts can, and that's your fresh air intake, then it's a problem. So really they need to be in an exhaust airway. So they will have service availability, and you will be able to drive light vehicles, most likely beside them, small vehicles to clean up and whatever and service. But more than likely they'll be in an exhaust airway. But you'll be able to run HV down there and air water pumping, So that will be used for other purposes.
And so you'll still have to always maintain a conveyor-free declines for main traffic, fresh air intake.
Yeah.
So will that likely change how ventilation systems are designed in underground mines, because you're going to have a dedicated return airway system that is in a decline, not in necessarily.
You'll probably
in
still
shafts?
need both. You'll still need both, because really at the bottom of the at the bottom of the conveyor is a crusher, which will produce dust. So you want to be taking its own dust out of the mine, and that's generally the way to do it. So, but don't forget, now you don't have 10 trucks running.
Yeah, exactly.
12, 14 trucks, or so there's big benefits on ventilation in that side of it.
And then, so I assume a big part of what you guys will be doing is determining, right, how deep can we put, and ore body dependent, how deep can we put this conveyor and the crusher system, and getting you the earliest amount of cash flow, because obviously the deeper it goes, the longer it takes to get the most optimum production going.
Yeah, you normally start off with trucks.
Yeah.
So it's a ramp up.
You're always going to have to.
Yeah, you're going to have to start off with trucks.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Well, those two
We digress.
Awesome.
We digress into talking mining.
No, that was fascinating. Just one last one on that. Do you think, sort of as a basic rule, electrifying open pits will be much easier before underground, or do you think equally just very challenging?
No, I think open pits definitely electrifiable, especially the bigger ones. They'll use the catenaries. They've been around for a long time, and they're just getting better at modularising these things, so you can get them in relatively easy, and you can still have battery. I know there's a few people working on battery 777s and aftermarket units and so forth. So I think it's a thing. It'll happen as well.
Awesome.
Joe,
I'm all out of questions, guys.
Do you need you're recruiting for geos or anything at the moment, Joe? You can chuck a free job advert up at the moment.
We just put one on, actually.
There you go. Get in touch.
Oh, mate. Well, thank you very much for that on short. You can't say it was short notice. We've been trying for a year. But I appreciate that. I learnt an absolute shitload.
Thanks a lot, guys.
About the
Appreciate
secrets of consulting.
Thanks very much.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Sensational, mate. Tell you what, a special place in my heart, Entech. Macca was one of I think he was like my first ever sponsor on Life of Mine back in the day.
What a champion.
Flicked me some cash each month, and I actually felt bad taking it. He was one of the great, out of that journey, there was a couple of people that really influenced this whole thing and where we are today, and he was one of them. So fucking a lot of thanks to him.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be doing Money Mine if it wasn't for
Well, no, I'll
connection
tell
there,
I'll tell you the story about why, and I think I've told this before. When I was just interviewing drunk underground miners all the time, I'm like, I want to do a battery metals spectacular.
Yeah.
I want to start talking about these battery metals and start talking about the share market. And I went to Macro. I said, do you know anyone who I could talk to about lithium, copper, and nickel? He's like, I've got the guy, forwards me on to Andy Clayton from Precision Funds Management, who are next door. And that was how talking about share market started.
Started doing
and then you two
Channel
are like,
Mine News was great.
Channel Mine News.
Yeah.
And then you two are like, fuck, this guy needs some help. And here's money of mine. So pretty much cheers Shane McLeay. And cheers Mineral Mining Services, our bloody partners, along with who else we got?
Grounded.
Mate, we got Grounded. We got CrossBoundary Energy. We got Sandvik Ground Support, CRE Insurance, K-Drill, Dash Sat, and thank you very much for Entech for coming on. Hooroo.
Hooroo. Have a great weekend.
Cheers.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation, and needs.